This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, episode 39. Is going to generate more dust than you ever imagined was humanly possible to generate. It's going to be flying everywhere. This is the CNC Router Tips Podcast, a show which answers one question from you, the listener, about CNC router tables, CNC software, hardware, web hosting, and business. I'll help you get started in your CNC hobby or business and help you cut through the confusion.
Today's episode is sponsored by themakersguide.com. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CNC Router Tips Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Griggs, and I've been puttering around the workshop quite a bit lately and busy with several different projects, so I figured I'd give you an update before we get going on today's episode of some of the things that I've been up to. One thing that has been taking a very large portion of my time is my new podcast with my co-host Kingsley Grant. And Kingsley Grant and I host a new podcast called Podcast by Friday, which is geared towards helping folks get their podcast launched in a very quick manner. In fact, we launched Podcast by Friday between the time we came home from the Podcast Movement conference and the following Friday. So it was less than a week to get our first episode out there. So if you're interested in podcasting or may know someone who's thinking about getting into podcasting, they might want to check that out at podcastbyfriday.com. Or they can check us out on Spreaker, which is Spreaker, Spreaker.com, or on iTunes. One thing you may not know is that I have more than one website, and I am interested in a variety of things. And because I'm interested in a variety of things, I have a variety of websites that talk about those things, because some of the things that I'm interested in are very small, very niche things. But one place that I write and have written for about 6 years is makermasters.com, makermasters.com. And that's a site where I talk about maker movement projects, things that folks are making. It can be anything from a 3D printer to a laser cutter, to a CNC machine, to a knitting project, for that matter. In fact, there's one guy that I wrote about a few years ago who built his own functional Michael Keaton-era Batmobile with turbine. So, I mean, if you're into kind of oddball projects about folks who are just making extraordinary things, you might want to check out makermasters.com. Now, my other website you've been hearing about since we started this podcast, and that's the Maker's Guide. And that's a website where I blog about things that are CNC related and router related, also milling machine related. It's also an e-commerce site, so if you wanted to pick up a triple edge finder or a copy of Mach 3 or any of the Vectric software like VCarve Pro or Aspire, that's the place to go. Someone just recently mentioned to me that I had no links on the CNC Router Tips podcast or the CNC Router Tips website that told people about these things. So I'll be fixing that probably about the time this episode's out. I'll put a tab up that says my other sites on there. So if you want to check those out, it'll be a lot easier for you to do that from the CNCRouterTips.com webpage. So that's what I'm doing online, in addition to the private Facebook group that we have. And some of you have asked how you find that group, and it is hashtag, which is the pound sign for the rest of the world, CNC Router Tips. And if you search that in Facebook, you should find the group, and you can apply for membership. It doesn't cost you anything. So, check it out. There's quite a few people who have done so already. In fact, I usually tell you how many members the group is up to. And as of today, the 8th of September, we have 3,697 members. So we'll probably hit 3,700 later today. Okay. So that's just one place that you can find some interesting things that we are doing things. So in addition to all of that, and my YouTube channel as well, if you search Bill Griggs, there's only 2 of us out there. You can probably guess which one I am if you've ever seen any of our artwork. It'll all be CNC related and not real estate related. So you can check us out on YouTube too. But I've been in the workshop a little bit, and I've been working on a few projects. One of them has been a very long-term project, and that's converting a Grizzly G0704 milling machine. You can get those at grizzly.com over to CNC. And that's been a long project because I haven't really been in a hurry to do it. But I mean, my machine now looks absolutely nothing like the stock machine. And I've done some things like change it over to a belt drive and get rid of all the gears. I've added ball screws on all the axes. I've even taken the stock motor off of it and increased it to a 1.5 horsepower 3-phase motor, which is really quite a departure from the stock machine. It's about double the horsepower available. So I've been putting up videos on YouTube about my progress, and I've also been blogging about it in both makermasters.com and on the Maker's Guide as well. So if that's something you're interested in, you can look at makersguide.com/ and there's dashes between each of these words, how to make your own CNC milling machine. So if you're out checking that out, that's something that you could look at, and it'll detail many of the things that I've been doing to get that together. And the other thing that I've been working on is adding another CNC router table to my workshop. And just a few episodes ago, I told you about the Stepcraft 2 600 CNC machine that I received from the folks at Stepcraft. And in fact, if you want to listen to what I had thought about if you want to listen to what I thought about the machine as I open the box, you can listen into episode 37. You can go to cncroutertips.com/37, and that will bring you up to date on that. So I intend to have a couple more episodes that talk about this machine and my progress with it, and how I intend to use it. So that's what I've been up to. And I know it sounds like a lot of things, but I love this stuff, and I frankly like to keep busy. So if you want to check out any information about that, you can just read about those things in the show notes. I'll have links to each of those places that I mentioned inside of the show notes, and that'll be at cncroutertips.com/38. Now, let's get to today's topic, which has to do with spoil boards and how to get them level. Okay, one question that I get quite frequently when I'm asked questions from beginners about getting started with CNC router tables is how to get their spoil board flat. We call this surfacing the spoil board. So, if you're doing a Google search on this, that's one way of looking at it, surfacing the spoil board. And you'll get good results of that. Essentially, what is happening is when you buy your router and you set it up on your table, you usually bolt a piece of wood to the table to serve as a sacrificial surface or spoil board. Some people call it a spoiler board as well, but it's more commonly referred to as a spoil board. And it is essentially there so that if the bit has to cut all the way around a part, It may have to go into the surface just a little bit of the spoil board in order to cut all the way through the wood. So if you have an expensive table that has, for say, aluminum bed, you really don't want your router bit cutting into that aluminum because you want that to stay nice because aluminum is expensive. So you put this sacrificial board up there, a spoil board. Now, when you clamp any piece of wood onto a table, it is not going to be flat. It's just the nature of wood. Wood changes shape based on humidity, heat, cold, a lot of other factors. And so you're really going to want to machine the top of that board flat in relationship to your machine. Now, perhaps we'll discuss it in another episode, but before you can machine your surface flat, you need to make sure that the router spindle itself is perpendicular, plumb, square, aligned, and pick any word you want with the router table and its axes. So you don't want it tilted to one side or leaning forward or back. And so you have to spend quite a bit of time learning how to tram a machine. And I have a resource that I will send to you for free that talks briefly about tramming and how to make your own tramming indicator or to go buy one. So if you'd like that, that will be in the show notes at cncroutertips.com/38. And I'll also put a link in the resources to it. But let's move on from that. Let's assume for the moment that you've already gotten your router aligned properly with the spoil board. You're going to need a bit to insert into the router. That will remove a lot of material very quickly. Now, this will typically be a bit that is larger than what you normally use when you're cutting most of your projects. If you could use the bits that you normally use in your projects to do this. It will just take a very long time. Let's say your bit is 1/4 inch in diameter. Well, it has to make passes up and down the entire length and width of your project. So however many passes it takes at 1/4 inch a pass, actually less than that because you don't want to cut the entire diameter in one pass. Whatever that adds up to, that's how long it's going to take to cut that spoil board. And you really don't want to do that. So you want a bigger diameter bit. Now, in the case of a full-size 4x4 router or 4x8 router, you can go with a bit at 2-3 inches in diameter, 1.5 inches, somewhere in that size range. With the smaller routers, the desktop size routers, you're probably not going to be able to swing a bit that is much larger than 3/4 or 1 inch in diameter, just because you don't have the horsepower and because you may not be able to fit the larger bit into the collet. But whatever size bit you're going to use, it should be appropriate for the machine you're using. Now, I'm going to put some links in to an article I wrote a while ago about a starter set of bits that you could use for this. And one of the bits that's included in that is a bit that you would use to surface your table. And if you want to take a peek at that article, you can go to cncroutertips.com/bits, BITS. And that will take you actually to a page on the Maker's Guide website that talks about it. And there's a link in Amazon there that you could click and it would bring up the appropriate bits. And you can get them through Amazon or order them from your local woodworking store, whatever. That's not the important part. The important part is that you have the appropriate tool for this job. So what is the appropriate tool? The appropriate tool is a bottom cleaning bit. And it is a special bit that has carbide that spans the entire length. There's no gaps on the bottom of this. It also has a cutting edge up the side of the bit so that it cuts square 90-degree passes. So you're going to want something like the bit that I use, that I will link to in the show notes. It's a bottom planing bit from Magnate. Now, I get mine from Amazon, and that's probably the quickest way to find these things and locate them. But, a Woodcraft store or a Rockler store or someplace would have those. But it's not an expensive bit. It's probably about $25 to $30 for the bit. Money well spent. Okay? So, again, there'll be a link to that in the show notes, and there's already one in the resources for that bit. But I would put that bit into the machine, and now I need to know how big my table is. So I would measure the length and the width of that spoil board. And I would go into my CAD my CAM software, actually, like VCarve Pro or Cut2D or whatever you're using, Fusion 360 or SheetCam, whatever that program is. And I would create a rectangle that is the same size as my spoil board, plus half the diameter of my bit, or the radius of my bit. So in this example, if my bit was a 2-inch diameter bit, half of that would be 1 inch. So if my rectangle was, the spoil board was 36 inches wide, I would add an inch to that and make a 37-inch wide rectangle. Okay? And I would do the same thing for the length. If the length was also 36, I'd add another inch. So I've got a 37 by 37 cutting area. And the reason I'm making this rectangle larger than the actual area is because that's the only way to guarantee that every portion of that spoil board gets machined by machining past the edges. So then I would create a pocketing toolpath using that rectangle, and I'd remove material from the top surface, probably at a 16th of an inch or a 32nd of an inch depth. I don't want to take much off on the machine, but I do want to make sure that I am getting some cutting happening on every portion of that board. Now, if you do this machining process and you find that there's a low spot or a high spot, you may have to run this tool path again, or you could look for those high and low spots before you get started by taking a measurement with a ruler that you tape to the side of your spindle. And you move your router bit to the middle of the table, and you drop down the straight edge, tape it to the side, and then jog over to the table. If you get drag, well, you know that part is higher. If you're not touching at all, you know that part is lower. So what you want to do is try and find the low spot in your table and set that as 0 and just machine down to that. It would save you some work on doing the toolpath multiple times. But that's pretty much how it's done. Now remember, because you're spinning a much larger bit than normal, you're also going to want to run the RPMs a lot slower than normal, because at the tips of that big bit, they're going to be whipping, and they're going really fast. So you want to back it down. I can't give you a place to start as far as the feeds and speeds for this, because your machine is different from my machine, which is different from your neighbor's machine. So this is where you have to know your machine a little bit. I know on my big 4x4 that I built, the warp drive, when I run with my planing bit, instead of cutting up at, mine has a dial on it that goes from 6 to 0. So instead of cutting at 5 like I normally do, I might be cutting at 3. Okay? So just be aware of that. You're going to need to run the bit a little bit slower than normal. As far as how fast you move the bit through the wood, though, you don't really have to slow down because we're not removing a lot of material. If you usually cut at 100 inches per minute, you can just, go right through it at 100 inches per minute or whatever your speed is. Now, the other thing to be aware of before we wrap this up is that when you're machining your spoil board flat, it is going to generate more dust than you ever imagined was humanly possible to generate. It's going to be flying everywhere. So if you have a vacuum setup or a dust collection system, this is a great time to use it. If you don't have a dust collection system, it's a great time to get one right before you do this. Because if you don't, you will have sawdust all over everything in your work area. I guarantee it. And that's pretty much the whole story of, surfacing your spoil board. Everybody seems to think it's hard or something. Well, it's not. It's just different. You're using a bigger bit. You're spinning the RPM slower, but you're moving it about the same as you normally would. So that's not a big deal. And if you've ever done a pocket tool path, well, you already know what a pocket requires and what to expect there. So no big deal. So get it out of the way now, early on, and start making projects that look good all over the board instead of having low spots in some areas and high spots in others. It's not rocket science, guys. But when you don't know how to do it, it can seem like it is. And so now you don't have that issue. So I hope this helped you, and I hope you liked the episode. If you did, and you'd like to get more episodes like this, there's a way that you can help me make that happen. And that is by leaving a rating and review in iTunes for the show. Only takes a couple of seconds, just click the 5-star button and say, hey, Bill's podcast was great. Send it in. Pretty simple. There's instructions at the bottom of every episode that we post that tells you how to go online. There's even a video I made to go onto iTunes and leave a rating and review. And I really wish that you would take the time to do that because it will help me to get this podcast into more people's ears, because once I have enough ratings and reviews, iTunes will start telling people about it. They'll post it in special places on the site. And that's what we all want. We want the folks who are using CNC routers and trying to learn to be able to find the information easily. So I'd really appreciate that if you could do that. Thank you very much in advance.
Today's episode is sponsored by The Maker's Guide, creator of the Triple Edge Finder. Get the edge you need, save time and frustration on your CNC project, and make setup a snap. Save time and material. Set up your workpiece on your CNC router table faster than ever. Accurately set your Z-axis height first time, every time. Automatically locate the corner or edge of a workpiece. Reset your starting point in the middle of a program. Quality crafted right here in the USA on US-made CNC machines. Get the edge you need today. Go to www.themakersguide.com/edge. The Maker's Guide. Useful tools for makers.
I often mention many different types of software during the episodes and hardware and cutters, and it can get a little confusing. So what I did was I put together a page on my website, CNCRoutertips.com/resources. And on that page, I list all sorts of resources there, from books to tools to software, all the things that I use that make my CNC experience better and easier. And I hope you'll check it out. So again, it's CNCRoutertips.com/resources. Now, if you'd like to have your question featured on the air, here's how. Need help? Ask me about your CNC router question on my podcast, the CNC Router Tips Podcast. I'll be glad to help or try and get you the help you need. I want this podcast to be a fun and personal experience for everyone and helpful. So let's keep it real and ask sensible questions Please use common sense and show courtesy to everyone. That way everybody wins. Here are some guidelines to ensure that your question is qualified to be featured on the show. Please keep your questions under 1 minute in length. If it goes a little over that, that's fine, but don't ramble. If you have a website and URL, you're allowed to share it, but only once during the recording. Spammy or disrespectful or deeply private questions will not be considered for the podcast. If you need to ask more than one question, just make each question a separate voicemail. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in and listening to the CNC Router Tips Podcast. If you'd like to join our free mailing list, you can go to CNCRouterTips.com, and there's a link right there on the top of the page which tells you how to do that. Thank you so much, and have a great day.